I suspect that may actually be one of the ways in which people can sort of go wrong, is that they feel as if they need to come from a position of expertise before they're able to say anything, or before they're able to generate any kind of audience. I think that's a dangerous sort of mindset to adopt.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenley, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make the change. Today, we have an amazing interview episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I want to tell you a little bit about the show. So the easy way to understand it is we have shows within the show. Sometimes we have interviews with industry leaders and others who are shaking up the space, and they're going to teach you how to do something that they do that's helped them be successful that you can adopt in your day-to-day. Sometimes we're going to cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon, and what that means for them. Every Tuesday, we're going to drop a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that will help drive better results in your day-to-day, quick, snackable, 5-minute episodes. Sometimes we'll open it up for Q&A where listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on. Any of those that you have, send it on over to us at podcast@loxo.co. And then lastly, you'll hear an occasional mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that's been bouncing around in his head about the recruitment space and really thinks that you need to know about. Today, I've got an incredible guest joining us for a conversation from his website, quote unquote. My job is to curate only the best, most interesting, and inspiring content from the world of recruitment and HR. This weekend's newsletter is hitting number 350, and there's over 32,000 subscribers. Today's guest is the perfect person to talk about why having and knowing your audience is important for business and to teach us how you can grow one too. So, Hung, what's up?
Hey, Sam, how's it going? Thanks so much for inviting me on the show. Very excited to have a chat with you, man.
Good, love it. So for anyone who doesn't know you, one, crawl out from under a rock, but two, you have over 20 years of experience in this space. I'm a numbers data kind of geek sometimes, so I was like, all right, what's that look like? There's 260 business days in a year, and if you have 8 working hours a day, that's 2,000 hours in a year. Well, the rule is 10,000 hours to become an expert master. So you've mastered this 5 times over, or is that right? Something about that. So 4 times over. Sorry.
It's a very generous way to look at it, Sam, but sometimes you can feel as if you've just been there too long, you know? I mean, I totally get the 10,000 hours thing from Gladwell, but they've got to be productive 10,000 hours, right? I mean, sometimes you can be grinding away, doing the wrong thing and not learning too much, and you could spend 100,000 hours doing that. So yeah, but I've been around a long time, and I've learned a few things. By no means everything, but there's a few things that I've learned that seem to work from different context to context, and then once you have those, it gives you a great deal of confidence when you make a different decision or you move to a different domain. You can rely on some of those principles and try them out.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mental models, first principles, all of that. So cool. Well, I'm excited to get into all of this. So conversation, let's jump right in. So we're talking about building audiences and everything else. How was Recruiting Brainfood born?
There's 2 different origin stories for Recruiting Brainfood, and I no longer know which one is true. They may both be true because I kind of think they both resonate in a very truthful way to me, but they may not be entirely compatible. But the very quick précis of it was simply version 1 is essentially certainly the case. The internet was so noisy and getting noisier over time. We can even everyone's got evidence of that directly. And I realized that as a person that was fundamentally interested in great content, it was becoming harder and harder to find that stuff. You had to click 10 things to get the one thing that might be worth your time. And that became super annoying. So over time, essentially, I ended up sort of identifying great places that consistently produce great content. I started archiving those, creating something of a taxonomy, a database that I could use for my personal purposes. And then over time, it became obvious I had a really strong resource that was very useful to me. And my thinking was, look, okay, if I had that problem, surely other people also have this issue. How can I kind of help them Why don't I just do a newsletter, pick out 10 things from this archive and share it with folks? And if they wanted to read it, great. If not, hey, no extra work for me, and happy to crack through. So that's basically one version of the story.
Love it. That was kind of the origin story, so to speak. So you were talking about wanting to curate that and having it. When you started setting out on that, what were the options for, like, how were you learning about these different things before that you wanted to go on and curate and share with others?
Yeah, so basically the newsletter was just really a way to connect with other people that I thought had the same issue. So it didn't really perform a function for me in terms of helping me identify more information. It was more a case of, look, I've identified this stuff. What do you reckon? And it was more of a way to enable other people to get the benefit of some of the work I've already done, because it seemed like a stupid waste of time for multiple people to be doing this type of curation. And it was like, okay, I'm doing it for myself anyway. Bear in mind, back in those days, there was no kind of commercial angle. There was no revenue idea behind anything. It was simply me and attempting to make the internet smaller, so to speak, so I could actually, have a healthier and more productive interaction with some of this digital media. And I just thought, look, it might be quite easy for me to open that out to other people with very little extra effort, and perhaps that can help some folks. So that was basically what the central idea behind Brain Food was. And in fact, it kind of leads us to one of the first points that's worth making in terms of audience growth, is that if you're able to kind of give a plus to somebody's day, no matter what sort of how big or small that plus is, that is kind of one of the key things to help grow any kind of audience. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture, doesn't have to be a career or life-changing kind of advantage you're giving to folks. It doesn't have to be any genius. It could be a laugh. It could be something that just picks them up from a downward trend to a slightly upward cut trend. Whatever it might be, give them something that's a plus. And that's the first thing I would say to folks who are thinking about audience building in whatever way. That's what you got to, that's your commitment. That's what you got to try and do.
I love that. And I honestly think a part of that is because there's so much mundane content and conversations out there. They're just kind of like boring B2B stuff or kind of like downer type news whereas you say, if you can give a plus to someone's day, whether it's, helping add value by teaching them something, giving them a quick laugh, it stands out because 9 out of 10 interactions aren't giving them that. So I love that point that you brought up there around, that's just one great way to build out your audience there. So let's go down that thread a little bit. How have you woven some of that type of mindset as you're building out that newsletter, kind of balancing witty cleverness with being viewed as truly a leader in the space? Because there is that level of not buttoned upness, so to speak, that you have to have, but you need to portray like trust, authority. So there's a fine line that you've clearly ridden well there. So just curious to hear if you've thought any about that.
Not until you've actually framed it in that way, Sam. And you know what? I think that it's worth examining that framing, because I suspect that may actually be sort of one of the ways in which people can sort of go wrong, is that they feel as if they need to come from a position of expertise before they're able to say anything, or before they're able to generate any kind of audience. I think that's a dangerous sort of mindset to adopt, because it always forces you to try and be that expert. And I think that's an impossible task for majority of the people out there. And in fact, not feeling that confidence and expertise is probably the thing that's stopping most people from producing any content at all, because they feel, who's going to listen to me? I've got nothing interesting to say. Whatever I think, I'm sure someone else has said it before. The classic excuses why you're not producing content or contributing to a public discourse. So what I would describe what I'm doing is not producing content or expertise or thought leadership. What I'm doing is basically generating a public discourse. And anybody has the right to do that, irrespective of your level or expertise, or irrespective of your self-assessment of your expertise. So I would say from my side, I'm generally not an expert on most things, and this is not false modesty. I think that's definitely just true. But I think I'm a person that's able to kind of dip my toes into different spaces and kind of quickly get what's what, without sort of feeling completely out of my depth in those spaces. So I'm not coming from a position of expertise. I'm coming from a position of dialogue. And I think if more people adopted that approach, you will find that actually we're more happy and more comfortable with producing content, or rather producing sort of conversations that other people might be able to participate or consume. So I think it's a very modern kind of way to think about it, because it's very social. It's very kind of raw often. It's pretty much conversation rather than content. But that's the stuff that people seem to be most interested in. I think people vibe with the fact that it's not sort of an expert. They vibe with just it's a person saying this thing, and it feels like I can be involved. And that's what content. The best content is the stuff where the audience, quote unquote, and the creator, the gap is very, very. It's permeable. You can cross over that gap, and we've seen that with YouTubers, live streamers, TikTokers, etc. The ones that have been most successful aren't the ones broadcasting expertise. They're the ones that talking to the audience.
Love that. That's so true. I think we humans have a pretty good BS meter, so to speak, when you have these people. There's two sides of it, right? So it's like the imposter syndrome. One is like, I'm not an expert. Who am I to tell people what to do, how to think, all of that? And then on the other side, you have the 23-year-old life coaches that are telling you how to set up your life perfectly. And you're just like, you're not an expert. Like you haven't experienced anything yet. And then there's that happy middle. And it seems like just there's been more and more people that they either don't share because they're scared to, or you have this set of people where the conversation doesn't go anywhere because in their head they think they're right, or there's only one way to do something, to know something. But that discourse, the conversation that you're starting, I am starting to see more people start to adopt that. And I think that it is a mindset of just this, like, there's so much knowledge out there that he's like, cool, well, let's go talk to people who do know about that and everything else. So I love that you're really starting to curate that conversation, get people thinking more that way, especially in the community, because there's so many thoughts about how to go about recruitment, who to go to for expertise, how to be doing outreach to sourcing to, there's so many different things that you could touch on. No one person can possibly be an expert in all of that. So love that you're curating all of that and everything else. So you shared a great tip earlier, it's like give a plus to someone's day. What other tips would you share with people that are trying to think about, like, how should they go about building an audience for themselves?
Relentless consistency. If that's something you want, but by the way, building audience is not for everybody. It could be that you just want to do, I don't know, a 10-part series of a blog post or something, and you just want to get it off your chest or whatnot. Great, no worries. It could be kind of something you just kind of set up and shoot it off and leave. If you do, though, want to grow an audience, and there's lots of reasons why you might want to do, anybody who's running their own business, anybody who's representing a business, anybody who's thinking long-term, like career investment and stuff like this, having a bunch of people that might pay attention to what you say is generally going to be better than having, less people that are going to pay attention to what you say. So audience building, I think, is something we natively do and naturally do anyway. We follow people, we connect and all that type of stuff without too much science behind it. But if you want to accelerate the numbers of people that follow you, and you want them to really always pay attention, the way to do it is to actually be super, super consistent. And I say relentless, and relentless sounds like really quite an intimidating term. But it's almost, you have to make that agreement with yourself, to say, okay, I'm going to start, let's say, posting someplace on LinkedIn. I'm going to post once a week on LinkedIn, whatever. Make that a promise to yourself, but then do that. You have to execute and deliver against your own promise. And the reason why that's important is because that consistency then is it becomes like a metronome for the audience. When you habituate yourself as a person that's producing this, you're also habituating the audience to expect it. So that over time, as you're super consistent, over time they become, oh, something is happening here, and it resonates with them in a certain way. And before you know it, they're expecting you to do this. And once they have that expectation, guess what? They're a locked-in audience. I noticed this not as a before I was doing recruiting brainfood, I was sort of reading random newsletters and stuff from other people, and I remember sort of always. There was one newsletter I was reading called Exponential View by Azim Azar, my ex-boss, as a matter of fact, and he relentlessly posted at the same time every week, Sunday 7 or something like that. I forget what it was. And he missed one. He missed one time. And I remember texting him. I said, "Yo, Azim, what's up? Where's my newsletter?" Right now, and I stopped myself. It's not mine. It's his newsletter. So why am I so possessive over something he can control? And he said, "Yeah, sorry, I'm on holiday." Of course, he's all right to be on holiday. But what happened then after that call? I realized, you know what? What's happened is he's habituated me to expect this content. And I'm now locked into this newsletter. Like I'm there. When it doesn't arrive, I'm complaining it's not arrived. So that is through Relentless Cadence. And it's the same if you observe stuff that happens on YouTube, TikTok, great examples, short form video particularly. If you're not posting super regularly on a consistent basis, you don't. The cadence can change, but you've just got to commit to the cadence and go for it. If it's daily, go daily. If it's weekly, go weekly. If it's bi-weekly, go bi-weekly. Whatever it is. But once you have it and you keep rolling it through, the audience gets addicted to it, and you'll get people that always tune in and always want to see it, irrespective of the quality of the content. And that's the key. That's really quite alarming to know, because suddenly the quality doesn't become the most important thing. Suddenly the content doesn't become the most important thing. I think it's the community sense that becomes the most important thing. Again, you see this in these sort of YouTubers out there. YouTube is very even harsh. I think you have to more or less do a daily post if you're going to be right at the very top of your YouTube game. But you can see some of the folks that do daily videos, like absolutely people, like millions of people are totally addicted to it and need to see it. So I wouldn't say that everyone needs to perform in this way or to completely abandon their lives to be content creators, etc. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we can learn from how audience building comes from this type of cadence. Like the relentless, this is always going to happen. This person always turns up. You know what, Sam? I've actually thought about this because it sounds like irrational. Like, why does this actually is the case? Why is it important? And I think it's a deal. It's a deal that you make with the audience, where you're saying, you know what, I'm going to do this thing. You're going to give me some of your very precious attention. Your attention's super precious because you get distracted everywhere online. You're bombarded with stuff. Please give me some of your attention. And in return, I'm going to promise I'm always going to be here and always deliver this. What you don't want to do as a consumer of content is to commit your attention to a place that's inconsistent, is mercurial, and may not even be there. It's similar, I think, to, let's say, watching a Netflix series. Everyone's watched a Netflix series. Wow, season 1, absolutely amazing. I'm totally bought in. I'm completely immersed in this, whatever. Cancellation of season 2. It's like, what? And you're like devastated because you said, look, listen, man, are you kidding me? I've literally invested my emotional content into these characters and into this story. And now you go ahead and cancel season 2 on me. You're irrationally outraged. Then you step away from all of that and think, oh, have I gone insane? And you kind of have a little bit. But it's the deal that they should have made with the audience. They said, give me some of your attention. We're going to guarantee we're going to give you this consistently. You can predict it. It's there. You don't need to worry about the change, sort of the future. This is always going to be with you. And I think anybody building content needs to think around how sort of the kind of entertainment media has built these audiences as a result of similar
fascinating, right? When you think about, you're becoming a habit for someone else, so they're becoming addicted to what you do and everything else. And along the lines of, when you reached out to your friend who was like, you okay? Why haven't you sent your newsletter? There's definitely newsletters that I look forward to. I'm just like, it comes once a month at this time, or it comes every morning at this time. And when it doesn't, there's just this one, if it's a person, you're like, you okay? You alive? Everything good? Or if it's from a business or something, you're just like, they've kind of let me down a little bit because you made that deal with them, so to speak. So it's a precious thing that you really have to be mindful of. Yeah, along those notes. So let's go level deeper with that. So let's say you do have someone that's thinking about whether it's for recruitment or any industry. You got started with a newsletter, but I think a lot of people are trying to figure out how. So where do they do this? How do they find the audience? Any tips or suggestions for someone that is kind of starting out at step one on this?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at this. You can look at it externally and internally, right? So let's talk about those two things separately. Externally, you've got to think about, okay, what is your reason? I guess this is the Simon Sinek why kind of idea. Now, what is the people you're trying to address? Are you clear on who that audience is? For me, it was pretty obvious. I wanted to speak to other people in the industry. I want to speak to recruiters, right? So great. That's clear. The persona is there, and it makes it very easy for you then to think about what you've got to do in terms of the construction of the newsletter or the content, because it's going to be recruiting related topics. So think on the persona that you think you want to communicate with, and that's the individuals that you need to deal with. If you're a recruiter, for instance, and you're recruiting in, I don't know, software engineering, maybe you want to sort of focus on software engineering as your kind of in your mind when you're putting together a conversation or some topics. Have a think about what's important to those folks, and that would be the thing that you could you could orientate a great deal of your stuff around. The internal side is more about, okay, you know who your audience is and who you're servicing, but what is your operational mode like? How does your day-to-day look like? What is going on when you're doing your work servicing this audience? Like, what are you actually doing to deliver the value to these people? Now, that sort of stuff is actually great raw material for content. So it's called sort of kind of the operating data that you're getting involved in. So you're not sitting there thinking, I need to thought leadership my way through all of this. Totally exhausting. You're never going to get there. And this is where you end up doing cliched stuff, because people are sitting there trying to create thought leadership pieces every week. Not going to happen. What you're much better off doing is simply taking an observational stance as to your workaday challenges, and then thinking, why is that a challenge? It's like this, and this, because the market conditions currently are like that. Great. There's the start of a conversation or start of a topic that you could talk about, blog about, or whatever it might be. One of the newsletters I write a short original essay called Open Kitchen. And it's an open kitchen because obviously brain food is everything food related, but open kitchen is the idea behind having, when you go to a modern restaurant, for instance, you have an open kitchen, right? You see people chop the onions, you see people at the fry station, you see the food being made. It's not just like magically appearing on your plate. Back in the day, some waiter would actually bring it out to you. You'd never see what's going on in the kitchen. These days, we want to see what's going on in the kitchen. It's the same thing with content. People want to know what it's like. What is it like working this way? And you, as a person that's actually doing that job, have expertise in what it's like. And no one can actually challenge you on what it's like to work in this situation, because you're the one doing it, right? So away goes imposter syndrome, literally disappears in a puff of smoke, like the phantom it always was, because you are the expert in your professional life. No one knows better than you what it's like being, Hung Lee, or what it's like being Sam at Loxo. There's only one person that knows this.
Yeah, I love that mindset of it, where it's not so much like, this is the playbook, this is the way, but when you approach it from, scratch my own itch, here's what I'm going through, you're going to share, the great things that worked and what you recommend, but also you're going to fail at different things, or things aren't going to work as you plan. And that's another great way for people to learn from that as well. And honestly, usually more valuable, because you cut that out from them from having to experience themselves.
And let me tell you this, right? Failure is actually great content. I hate to say that everything should be content in your life, and not to say you should deliberately engineer failures. But it does change. I've noticed the change since I've adopted this like super transparent. You can call it working in public, or you can call it whatever you like. I think it's a very similar kind of approach. It's basically saying, you know what, well, I'm trying to fix this. I don't know what I'm doing, but it is generally my approach, right? So you're not trying to finish. You're not trying to provide like finished solutions without explaining and working through. You're literally saying, you know what, as I'm working through, you're going to see it, and you're gonna experience the problems and the wins as you're with me. And it's actually changed my attitude to failure to a large degree, because it suddenly made me it's less harmful. It's like, you know what I mean? You make a failure and you talk about it immediately, and you blog about it and say, oh my God, this just happened. And then, you know what? It actually historicizes that problem. And it kind of opens it up to everyone and say, oh yeah, Hung's just screwed this up. And then suddenly it becomes okay. And so I think it's a really interesting, again, you talk about psychology, but being super, super open with some of the things that we might traditionally hide or be ashamed about, actually really helps you get over it super quickly. And it means that the next time you encounter something similar, it becomes smaller as a thing. You know, it doesn't dominate your mind because you think you're going to screw this up, because you know what, you screwed it before. You were totally public about it, and actually nothing happened. You know, it was all fine. So I think the approach has like subsequent benefits that we didn't actually know. Number one, obviously, you create great conversation. Number two, it actually
like, do you view
reduces
it,
the
the
impact
outcome
of
is
disaster.
a consequence or an iterative learning, so to speak? So a lot of people, they hide failures, are scared of them because they think, you know, my boss isn't going to like this. I'm going to get dinged for it. It's going to come back and haunt me. But more often than not, if you own it and say, hey, this happened, you know, it didn't work as I planned, but I learned from it. They're just like, okay, you got it. You understood what happened. We're going to go in a different direction. We kind of cross that path out, so to speak, from ever running it again. They love that kind of stuff because it also helps them and their modeling. So yeah, love that train of thought there. So one final thing is, as we start to round out this conversation, so you've started to, you know, figure out your audience, where they're at. You want to start getting content out, or however it is that you're going to be building that audience. How do you know if it's working? Are there any leading indicators that you should be keeping an eye on? My favorite question from leaders in marketing is always like, when am I going to see results? So what types of, are there any, you know, guiding indicators or anything that someone should keep in mind?
Yes, they are. But once again, I'm gonna throw in an unhelpful comment. And the comment I would make is actually, you shouldn't care. Like, we care overly much as to what converts, quote unquote. Now, I get it. We're all working in business, and you know, we need outcomes. We need to have those things. However, I think it's very similar to like playing golf or something, right? Like, you know where you need to drive the ball, but if you are just obsessed with looking at, you know, the hole all the time and not thinking about your actions and your technique, you're gonna miss every time. So I think, yes, you know where the end game may be. Hey, I want to, you know, I think it'd be useful for me to grow a distribution channel, or useful for me to, you know, grow my audience times this amount of number. I think this, you know, in a vague, undefined way, it's gonna help me in future. That's great as a vague thing, but once you've figured that vague thing out and you're on your way, don't be too overly focused on the ROI. One thing I've noticed with marketing, and this is people feel free to challenge me on this, but the where we measure ROI, we basically come in with that judgment too soon, because we're looking at it in terms of 30 days, 90 days at max, right? Whatever campaign, project, whatever, you know, the marketing director is going to say, hey, you know, what's 30-day ROI or 90-day ROI? Audience building, it's way, way out beyond 30, 90 days. Way, way, way out. You may not see anything until, you know, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, that type of duration. And if you actually notice, let's say blog, podcasts, if you like, are a good example of this. There's millions of podcasts out there historically that have been created. 99% of them are less than 10 episodes. Why is that? Because they did 10 episodes and then they try to do some ROI on it and realize, oh, there's no ROI, let's abandon it. And they abandon the scene. There's only like 1% actually go beyond that 10. And as you keep going in terms of scale, even less. And what is happening here is that I think we quit too early. And we quit too early because we apply the marketing ROI to it, too soon. And with audience building, I think it's a different set of measures, and it usually takes a lot longer. Which is again why you need to think about this, because if you're just doing the thought leadership stuff and it's very hard for you to produce content, for instance, you're not going to last long enough, because the effort it takes to produce the content is too strenuous for you to continue to do it for a year, where it might take you that period of time. So if you've got a long distance play, it's almost like a long distance athlete. You've got to train in different ways. You can't afford to be doing stuff that is a 100 meter sprint. Good bit of advice for a friend of mine who you might know him, Matt Alder, who runs the Recruiting Future podcast. I think he's at episode 500 or something ridiculous like this. And when I started the newsletter Recruiting Brain Food, actually I spoke to Matt about this. I said, listen, Matt, you've been doing the content side. At that time, he was purely podcast. I was purely newsletter. And I think, what's your advice? He said to me, Hong, you should do 52 newsletters before you even look at the numbers. And I said, you what? 52. At the time, I was the old marketing mindset. I said, what are you talking about? He said, just do 52. Like, you make the commitment to do once a week and just do it. Then look at what's going on. And I said, all right, Matt, if he can do however many podcasts, I can write this email, right? No worries. And I just went on that journey. And every time there was a quit point before that first year, I remembered that conversation with Matt. And I tell you right now, Sam, quit point was issue number 2 was a quit point, right? Very, very nearly didn't send the second newsletter, Recruiting Brain Food, because I actually messed up the first newsletter so badly that, in fact, no one received it. So I sent it to, I was the only subscriber. I sent it to myself. So this is how successful that start was, right? So literally no one read it. It was like me. And I thought, right, I just put this work in and put this together. And like, I actually just sent it to myself, like literally zero purpose. So I thought, okay, great. I got it. And then I remember Matt's conversation. Let's do issue 2. Boom, it goes out. Second quit point was issue number 10, right? Issue 10. So it's 10 weeks in. Normal times in marketing where you start thinking about ROI. And I was thinking, you know what, there's 30 people on register. There's 30 people reading this thing. 30. After 10 newsletters, I was thinking, you what? And this is when you're getting like, 1 week you might get 1 subscriber and you're thinking, oh my God, an extra subscriber. And then the next day, 2 people unsubscribe and you're totally devastated because you've gone backwards by 1. And I was thinking, that was what is the point? There's another quit point at 10. I thought, what is the point? I'm just sending it to myself. I just read it myself. Why am I doing this? And I just, again, remember the conversation with Matt. I said, look, I'm going to just keep plowing this through. And after I got over quit point number 2, I just said, I'm going to do 52. And I just pounded this throughout. I tell you something, once you have that commitment, you're going to keep going. The audience feels it. The audience feels it, man. And they're saying, you know what, this guy's going to stay here. It's worth my attention. I'm going to sign up to this because he's not going to go away. And then around about issue 30, here's where you first get indications, right? So 30 weeks. That's when I first started seeing other people, without my solicitation, start recommending the newsletter publicly. And I started getting recommendations like that, and then a big spike of subscriptions based on this person's recommendation. I thought, wow, that's actually really cool. Someone liked it enough that I don't know. Yeah, I've never met this guy, but he stepped away and he's actually promoted it to his audience, and he's 10 more people to subscribe. Then that's an indicator when they start doing these things that's successful. And then from there, it's like, okay, I'm just piling through, and then momentum builds. Success builds upon success, and then it becomes actually harder to stop than anything else. Again, let's throw more analogies in there. It's like starting a car, riding a bike. The first turning of the wheels, the hardest part. You got to have the momentum going forward. Where we make a mistake with audience building is that we think it's too early. We think that we've rotated the wheel enough. We haven't. It takes a long time. I would say it's less about the weeks. It's more about the reps. I think it takes at least 20 to 30 before you start building audience where people are starting to notice it and think, you know what, I'll keep checking this out. Because the first 10, they're thinking you're going to bail. So that's not audience. That's someone who's like almost a transient person because they think you're transient. So they think you're a pop-up shop, right? There's another analogy. They think you're a pop-up shop. Yeah, it's a nice bit of coffee or whatever. That's fine. They're not changing their route for you because they think you're a pop-up. All right. When you stop popping up, you paint your names on the plaque or whatever. You're down there. You are there for. They're going to start saying, you know what? Yeah, I'll change my route because I like the coffee.
I love that. All the analogies too. I'm gonna have to try to figure out a way how to list all the analogies that came out of this episode. But yeah, I always call it in marketing, get the snowball rolling. That's what it is at the end of the day. It's hard to get it started, but once you do, that momentum is real. It gets going. And that story's cracking me up. And to the point about issue number 1, I went on your Substack last night. I was like, I wonder if I can go find issue number 1. But now I know it only lives in your inbox from a handful of years ago, so I'll probably never find it.
You know what? There is an archive, but I switched to Substack from, I think, Review. So it's the newsletter historically split into 2 now, which Review is owned by Twitter. So I think Elon Musk might have actually completely blasted them away. So it could well be that the early episodes, early issues are no longer available. But I have archived them in a different place, so you could reinvestigate them. But yeah, it's if you go back to way back when the first newsletter was sent to nobody but me, literally one subscriber only.
I love it. Well, I think this was incredibly helpful for the people that. I mean, I don't have any subscribers to this podcast yet. Hopefully, it'll grow over time. But like you say, it's really taking an approach of. You want to do this to learn, start a conversation, keep the discourse going, and then be in it for the long haul. Enjoy what you do with it. And then I love that advice. If you can wait a year. But even to your point, it's going to be 6, 9, 12 months realistically until you start to see something meaningful, whether it's your subscription increases or in business. I always say it's going to take time for people to say, I want to purchase your product or service. That's all going to take time. And one small marketing tip that I always like to recommend is when you think about trying to understand how people learned about you, if you ask them directly, whether it's a question on your form on your website or a conversation that you might be having with them, just ask like, hey, how'd you find out about us? And usually that's where you'll hear something like, I saw you in Hung's newsletter. I listened to a podcast that your CEO was on. A colleague mentioned you all in Slack. Those aren't going to show up in any of your typical like marketing or biz dev outreaches, but that's exactly what comes from these types of creating an audience, engaging where they're at. So that's where it's going to show up. You're not going to see any hard data around it from tech platforms, but when you have that human conversation, you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's how I go about making my decisions as well.
100%. I think the fundamental, the eternal challenge of marketing is always attribution, right? Like, where do we actually know? Yes, there's certain moments where there's triggers and events you can absolutely track that's where it's come from. But a lot of buying decisions, particularly the bigger buying decisions, they need multiple touch points. And oftentimes there's lots of abandoned moments where the person hasn't fulfilled. But you know what? It's in their mind. Buying a car is exactly like this. Like, very few people actually encounter some advert, click on the advert, and then buy the car. Like, who does that? Of course not. You're going to encounter something. You've seen a review. It's in your mind somewhere. 3 months down the line, you see some dude driving the same car. You think, that's quite cool. Your friend then gives you a bit of advice, whatever. And then you see an advert. Then you say, yeah, okay, now's the time. So it's very hard to do the attribution, but having kind of being the person having the conversation in the right places, I think is a massive boon for software vendors. It's a massive boon for anybody running a business. And in fact, if you're the person that can kind of host the conversation, so don't put all the pressure on yourself to produce the conversation. If you can just be the person that makes sure that conversation happens, you're going to get the benefit yourself as well. Even more so perhaps than being a participant. So you're making sure that other people can interact. Guess what? That should be the easiest thing you can do as a marketer, so to speak, because you don't have to do the interaction, but you're still kind of owning the space where those interactions occur.
Oh yeah, spoken to someone who started up a community in Facebook not long ago as well. I know that you're speaking from experience there. So great. Well, really appreciate your time. And as we wind down, aside from subscribing to your newsletter, if they don't already, any final tips, recommendations for our listeners on where to find you or keep up with you?
Yeah, I mean, recruitingbrainfood.com is probably the best place. I think from there, everything spiders off. I'm generally around in most sort of social networks and different places. Recruiters probably want to try and find me on LinkedIn. Happy to talk to you on LinkedIn, but I've hit the limit on there. So typically, I'm not able to accept immediately. And I do need to say this, man, because people like send a request. I can't respond, and then basically I look like complete, very ignorant. That's not the case. Literally, I can't accept it. LinkedIn will stop me, and I have to delete someone in order to accept these requests, and that's like an awful thing to do. So I'm not able to do that either. But yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, and talk to me on email. I'm here and happy to chat.
Love it. Too social for a social network. That's a different level that you've reached there. So, all right, Hung. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us for the show. Truly appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. And I really hope it inspires some recruiters to start incorporating this into their day-to-day moving forward. So, all right, everyone, that's the show. This was the interview with Hung, talking about building your audiences. Till next time.